One of the things we'll be doing today is we will be recording this for view at a later time for folks who weren't able to make it today, as long as we can figure out where it went to. The recording has started. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Martha Malone with the Industrial Research Institute. Today for the brown bag, we're going to be redoing one of the very popular sessions at our annual meeting last month now, believe it or not, it's June, and wanted to bring that out to folks because of the real interest that we see in our membership on the topic of serial innovators. This is something that we first started talking about in the membership at least a couple of years ago, and people were saying we really need to hear more about this. So we were very excited when Dr. Vojak and Dr. Price came to us and said, hey, we have some new research about this, let's talk about it. So today we're going to be hearing their presentation again. We have Dr. Bruce Vojak, and Bruce is the Associate Dean for Administration at the College of Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And we also have Dr. Raymond Price, who's the William H. Severance Chair of Human Behavior in the College of Engineering at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. We are very fortunate that both of these folks, while in academia now, also have industry backgrounds, so I think they've been there. They understand a lot about what our folks have done in the past, and they are also, with Abby Griffin, co-authors of the recent book, Serial Innovators, How Individuals Create and Deliver Breakthrough Innovation in Mature Firms. A couple of logistics for today. As we're starting, everyone will be on mute, and we will have Bruce and Ray will be doing a presentation. If you have any question of clarification during the presentation, go ahead and type that question in the question box. But we really want to hold the more in-depth questions until the end of the presentation. So at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for question and answer, and you can either raise your hand and we'll unmute you to ask the question in person, or you can also type in a question in the question box, and we'll moderate those questions for Ray and Bruce. One note, today is supposed to be, we're expecting some thunderstorms here in Arlington, Virginia, so if for any reason that somehow we get shut down, please do dial in again. We'll try to keep this thing rolling. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bruce and Ray to start us off and tell us more about their research.
Great, thanks very much, Martha. To begin, this is Bruce Vojak, and Ray and I would like to thank all of you for dialing into this webinar today. We're looking forward to sharing this information with you and perhaps answering some discussion questions and getting into dialogue with you as appropriate. As some context, Ray and I, and as Martha had mentioned, our colleague Abby Griffin, who's currently at the University of Utah, over the past decade, we've had the privilege to interview, study, and collaborate with some really powerful individuals, people who we've labeled serial innovators. And they're the ones that have been given credit by both their colleagues and their managers for having created and brought to market multiple breakthrough new products, and in many cases also processes. And so by working with them, we've gained some pretty good insight as to the distinctions between incremental and breakthrough innovation. And we've also begun to understand who these people really are, their characteristics, how they create, such as their processes, if you will, and how they navigate their organizations. And by doing so, we've gained some insights into how to identify, develop, and manage these people for success in the organization.
The other part is that for this audience, we're going to explore, okay, how do you create an innovator-friendly culture? What does that look like? What's required? And part of the reason for doing that is that as we've talked with these innovators, many of them are concerned about their companies today, and they're concerned that A, they wouldn't be hired. Often, some of them would not make it through the screening process today. Second, that the new innovators, the potential innovators, aren't being adequately developed. Third, the time for these major breakthrough innovations is getting harder and harder to find. And as the financial controls are so tight that there's little flexibility to hide these exploratory projects. And then we've coined the term of the managers. Great managers of innovation are probably even harder to find than serial innovators. And so it's it's looking at this culture and how is that created. And it's challenging for organizations to have the patience to stay with innovations once they've been created, to see them really to realize their potential in the marketplace. So there's a lack of being willing to stay with that. So as we proceed with the discussion, we're going to look at our serial innovator research, who they are, how they create, how they influence their organizations, some management practices that we've seen that work and don't work, and then we'll talk about some initial ideas for this innovator-friendly organizational culture.
In order to be sure that we're all using the same language, we have this next chart here just to make the distinction between what we'll be referring to as breakthrough innovation from incremental innovation. With breakthrough innovation being much less likelihood for success, a much higher degree of difficulty in contrast with incremental innovation. And as we'll discuss perhaps many times throughout, it's really this breakthrough innovation that, while riskier, is really what's necessary to permit and enable the firm to survive over time. It has a much greater and longer-lived financial return. And so we're focusing really on that lower right-hand corner in the work that we've done in this time frame. As I've mentioned, we've been at this for over 10 years. And really one of the distinguishing features of the work that we've done is that we've taken what we refer to as a people view of innovation as opposed to a process view. So in our research activity, as we've interviewed these people, we've really asked them to tell us their stories. We don't ask for their philosophy. We don't ask for their process. We just want them to tell us, or wanted them to tell us, what they did. And then we've looked for patterns in that activity. And again, these are very rare individuals. They've had significant and repeated impact. So these are not just individuals who've had one big success and don't have the skill to repeat it. We've covered a wide range of industries and multiple firms in each industry as well. So this is really data that transcends multiple industries and multiple companies. And in fact, as we would present this to most groups, we will very often have several people come up afterwards and say, we have somebody like that in our organization. Very recently, just within the last month, our research was released in book form. In the previous slide, we listed that we had a number of publications as well, but this literally just came out within the last month, and from Stanford University Press, and it really does contain a summary of the observations that we've been able to grasp over these last many years.
And one of the things where we'll start out is we looked at who are these individuals and what are their characteristics, what works there, and you'll see on this list that we divided these up into a variety of categories. One about what motivates them and what drives them. And that they're self-motivated. They're not driven by other things, but they're self-motivated to solve customer problems. Then we talked about their personality, of how they're hardwired. So what do they come to the game with? And we've talked about this, the curiosity. They're very curious people. One was described as, if I look out the window and see a tree, I see a tree, but they want to know the genus, the species. They want to know where they grow best, why it does well there. They want to know everything about it. And then systems thinking and creative. The systems thinking we'll touch more on a little bit later. And then tenacious. They see things through to completion. They're completers. The perspective is an interesting one. It's kind of how their view of the world. And most of them, all the ones that we studied, were in businesses, and so they view that they're there to create value for the company and to create value for the consumer as well. But they see technology as a means to an end rather than the end in and of itself, and they value others. So there's a deep-seated value of kind of their view of the world, because some technologists value technology more than the consumer or more than other people. Not so with these folks. And then their preparation is that they're agile learners. They look both broad and deep, which is part of curiosity, is that they look broadly at a lot of things and then they dive deeply at times. And we put these together in terms of, if we said you wanted to go identify and say how would you find these people, and while all of the characteristics are important, we came back and said let's just look at how they engage with problems, projects, and the business and people. And as you think about how they engage with problems, they come at it with that curiosity, the systems thinking, the creativity. So they bring those characteristics, those elements of their personality are embedded in how they look at problems. And we think you can see this as what they do early in their careers. We think you can see this even as students. You can begin to say, how did they think about problems and what did they try to do? And I'll pick on the systems thinking one a little bit, and that is at every stage they're saying, okay, I'm working on a component early in my career, but how does that component fit in the rest of the system? Or I'm thinking about a product, but how does that fit in the system of the company? They're always asking those kinds of questions. When they engage with projects, you're not looking for people that jump from one project to another without completing. There are some people that are intensely creative, but they're not completers. These people see things through, and that tenaciousness comes out in that, as one of them described, the guy that did the laser printers for HP, he said, I was 8 years to an overnight success. It takes a long time to often see these breakthrough projects into the market and see them be successful. And then how they engage with business and people, again, it's that technology is a means to an end. They see people's strengths, they enlist other people, and they're in business to create value and create profit for the company. And the manager implication of this is it's this complete set of characteristics. We don't think it's one or just a couple. You're looking for this whole set and saying we're looking at these as we're identifying potential innovators or as we're thinking about new hires. You're looking for that whole set of characteristics that we think distinguish these folks from others.
And it's the fact that it's the whole set that makes these people so unique and again, so powerful. If we turn our focus now from the characteristics to the processes they use, we had seen a pattern of behavior that we refer to as this hourglass model of innovation, and that appears in this next slide. If you were to say the prevailing view of innovation is to have a front end and a back end, you could say generally the upper part or upper half of this chart is the front end activity, the lower half is the back end. But it isn't really a fuzzy front end followed by a gated process. I want to be clear, though, that it doesn't mean that we reject those approaches. It means that these people work within those approaches. They'll work within, for example, a stage gate process. But as they do so, these are the features of the kinds of activities that we see in their behaviors. One of the things that's really of note in this slide, in this model in particular, is that there's a lot of potential for feedback. There's a lot of activity that's contingent. They make decisions within each one of these 5 different spheres that may move them forward, and in fact, it may move them backward. One of the people we profile in the book, Tom Osborne at Procter & Gamble, he was working on a problem of feminine hygiene products, and by really understanding the problem deeply, he realized that he had to really reframe the problem and go back to finding the right problem, go back to the upper left-hand corner in order to think about the problem differently, in order to make really the breakthrough innovation that led to the billion-dollar brand that Always Ultra is today. So again, these feedback loops are very important. There's a significance to this beyond the fact that they're there, and that is that this really results in it being a nonlinear system, which means it's a mathematically chaotic system, and there are a lot of implications about what that means in terms of being able to predict and forecast activity. Another thing that was really important in the way these individuals behaved was as they immersed themselves deeply in a problem, they had what we would refer to as a convergence of understanding. They very, very often started with deeply understanding the customer and the customer needs. And I mean that in distinction with the market and the market needs. They looked at really how products and processes, for that matter, if it was internal to the organization, how they'd be used by other people. And what they would do is they would really get into that, understand it deeply, and then go back and check to see the interaction with how it interacts with the technology to find some technical solution that might address that customer need, and go back and forth, if you will, and then periodically bounce back and check to ensure that market needs, a broader set of needs, were addressed. And so as they went back and forth, they moved towards this position where they had a holistic solution, a solution that really addressed technology, customer, and market. And so they weren't just solving one. It wasn't just a technology push. It wasn't just a market pull, but they were solving the problem as a complete set. And so that brings us to this next slide that really emphasizes that it's even a more broad, holistic discovery than what that previous slide showed. It's not just the customer, not just the technology, not just the market, but it's also looking at the whole of process, the organizational politics, financial issues, available resources, manufacturing. These are people that were able to grasp all these areas. They may not be expert in all, but they were able to grasp information from all these areas and look at it as the entire whole. Referring back to Ray's comments about the characteristics, their curiosity and drive to understand things in depth gave them the skill to collect all this data, and their systems thinking capability allowed them to synthesize it in this very highly nonlinear way. And so it's all these characteristics now playing out in how they navigate the process of innovation, which really makes this kind of hang together, if you will. So if you take these key features of the processes, and again, we've gone through this very quickly now, but again, the nonlinearity, it's highly uncertain. There's a lot of discovery going on of customer needs, of maybe new technologies or existing technologies that might fit those. This very personal, engaged approach, and also experience that leads them to believe that they're going to succeed, means that to manage these people, you really are looking at pretty personalized relational management. They need time to do these things in order to immerse themselves in the problem. You need managers that need to accept the uncertainty associated with it, but still expect that the serendipitous result will be out there. And then in order to do this, you need the skill to identify the people, because it's not just everybody that should get this highly personal treatment.
And then there's a really important piece in what Bruce just said here, and that is that if you come up with something that is really truly different, and you reframe and you come at it with a new paradigm, there's a whole host of issues about how do you get that accepted in the organization. And almost to a person, when we talked to them about this, they talked about politics, and they said we started off with kind of this naive view, and there's a whole host of reasons why they had that naive view, but it was that invention's sufficient. There's an intrinsic value to the innovation, and I've figured some things out. If I figured it out, managers should be able to realize and act on those insights, and that essentially my task is complete once the product is developed or once I've had this insight. And they said we started out with that often because that was the way projects came to us early in our careers, that the managers gave us a task, we did the task, we did this, but now we're thinking about something that reframes the problem, that comes at it in a whole new way, and is really one of these breakthrough issues. And now the problem's substantially more complex than that. And so now they become willing to engage. And as they engage, they say, I've got to be willing to convince the rest of the organization, because I understand this better than the manager does. I understand the implications more. I see that whole context. Coming back to that curiosity, in the systems view, I see how it fits in the rest of the system. So now I need to go off and do these other pieces. I've got to apply my creative problem solving to the political task. And it's not one person, it's not just my manager, but it's many people, and they're all outside my comfort zone. And so the challenge to this is now to apply all of their creativity and innovation skills and say, I'm going to go solve the political problem now. just one example. I shared some of these results with one of my colleagues here at the university, who's probably one of the most creative people that I've met. And he said, "Oh, that's what's been wrong. I've had all of these brilliant ideas, and I haven't gone and engaged the organization. I haven't used my creativity and intellect to solve the political problem, to get them accepted." Once he did that, they become really good at working the politics of an organization, because they apply the same creativity and problem-solving skills. So they accept the responsibility, they apply those creative problem-solving skills, and they're not, because of their other personality capabilities, they're willing to engage others and be able to look for the problem. So as I look at the manager implications for this, part of it is you're not driving them, you're unleashing them. You got to protect them at sometimes from unproductive activities, and if there's a requirement, it ought to be to engage with the customer, because the customer or the consumer provides a lot of the motivation to go fight the battles inside the company, because you've got something that people want. And then if another implication for managers is, say, you can start encouraging people to think about the organizational issues, to develop their influence skills. As we're working with one company, this set of influence capabilities is a huge set of skills that they want to have their technologists become very skilled at, because you're going to need them. It's not a project until it's accepted by the organization.
So to summarize, to this point in this presentation, this webinar, we've talked about the characteristics of these people, how to identify them, with how they engage in those different areas that Ray spoke about. I spoke a bit about the processes, how they come to look at problems and how they navigate a problem set. And then Ray just talked through here some of their navigation of the interpersonal issues. Again, this is really a quick thumbnail sketch, but are there any questions of clarification that might come up now that any of you might have before we move on to present the manager's perspective in this? And I should add, while we wait just a moment here, that these are not people who are curmudgeons and hide in a corner. These are people who do actively engage. That's a real key point. Well, we're not seeing anything, so we'll take that as a green light to go ahead.
Hey, Bruce?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, we have one question from Dan. Dan, do you want to go ahead and give your question?
Sure. How do the characteristics of the serial innovator intersect with the characteristics described in the Innovators DNA?
If you look at those Innovators DNA from Christensen and them, it's looking at, you say, okay, there's some curiosity that fits in with that. I don't know that they talk about the tenaciousness quite as much as we might focus there. Certainly the creativity fits in there. I don't remember all of their dimensions. I do remember looking at them and thinking, okay, there's some there, but it had to do with kind of the creativity. The other piece with coming at it of being intrinsically motivated by the customer, to being able to drive there, I think was something that would say is quite different than what the Innovators DNA would come out.
And I'll add, too, that the connections between the characteristics and the politics and the processes are something that we really want to emphasize here, that the characteristics don't stand alone. The characteristics are there and enable them to have these abilities to discover solutions, as well as discover ways to navigate the organizational politics. So we're talking about a pretty holistic set of observations and solutions here. Does that help? Yeah, it's a good question, though, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are we okay, Martha?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about the direct technical manager of these people. We want to be clear that when we talk about serial innovators, we're talking about people who are really embedded in their organization and the technical side. This isn't, for example, a Steve Jobs, even though he was a highly innovative person. We're talking about someone who has to really navigate from within. And so their direct manager plays a really critical role in this. And one of the people we profiled both in our research but also in how we've reported the results, is Dennis Anders. At the time that we interacted with him, he was the general manager of an SAIC business unit. He was hired actually by the founder of a small startup, and shortly afterwards he led that startup to being sold to SAIC, and then stayed on to run that business unit. Now has progressed to be senior VP within the organization. But Dennis was a fascinating guy because he really recognized the value of innovation in the organization to sustain it, and also what he had to do to allow that to happen. And so the founder had actually retired not too long after the acquisition by SAIC. And what Dennis noticed later was that their pipeline of innovation was beginning to dry up. So he went back and in a very highly relational, very personal, friendly way, re-engaged the founder, very simply encouraged him to come back to the organization, which he did. And then Dennis also organized a small group with the founder, Andy, and some others to really kind of go after identifying deeply customer needs, and then also going forward to move that forward. And in not too long a period of time, long enough that, I mean, they really needed to engage with these issues, but he found that this was more than paying back the investment. About, I think, a threefold return was what he was seeing based on the time that they spent on that. And while they couldn't sustain it indefinitely in terms of the flow, it was the kind of thing that Dennis did on a periodic basis. The other thing that he did, too, though, was that, and when you hear him talk about his innovators, in particular the serial innovator, Andy, you see the richness of insight and understanding, the nuance that he has. He deeply understood this person, and he understood how to relate to him and how to work with him. And if you will, like Ray had said just a moment ago, he really knew how to unleash the innovators, not overly guide them or direct them. What we saw in terms of then the best practices of managers in general, again, these are direct managers, we're not talking about executives yet, we'll come back at that in a bit, that these informal processes played really the most significant role in how they were able to manage, motivate, and keep from demotivating serial innovators. Again, they were highly skilled at having the discernment to identify these people. They had patience, they had understanding. They really enabled and encouraged this innovator contact with customers, which is something that doesn't always happen, and then appropriately ran interference. And so, if you will, Dennis and the others who were the exemplars as managers, in a way were almost working for the innovators, not organizationally, but they were really there to support. And both the innovators and the managers working together was really a trust relationship, a mutually respecting relationship, and a powerful one. Formal rewards are still important. In particular, these innovators working in large, mature companies, or at least mature companies, not always necessarily the largest, but mid to large sized mature companies, they recognize that the company values money, and therefore they felt that it was appropriate for them to receive what the company valued. So they wouldn't want to do this for free, mainly because it wouldn't be right in their eyes. They're also very highly idealistic people.
The other piece, when they found these managers that worked well, they often stayed with them for a long time. Yeah. In one case we had where a manager and an innovator had stayed together over a 17-year period. Another case, you had the innovator who had risen at a higher level in the organization in terms of ladder or rank, but still worked with a manager that was at a lower level because of the influence and the impact and the way that they'd work together collaboratively. So if you look at the things that, in this one of the studies that we did, we looked at the innovators and their immediate managers and talked about what motivated or demotivated the innovators. And these, as Bruce said, these informal practices, and I'll summarize those. You can read down that list of things, but it's and all of those you'd say are pretty bad practices from most managers, for most of us, most of the time. But the big one there is that anytime that you have a transactional relationship rather than a relational one, it was pretty negative. And often managers will do that for what they think are the right reasons, that they're trying to treat everybody fairly, They're trying to take everybody into account, but it comes across to the innovator as more transactional rather than relational, and that just didn't seem to work very well.
Hey, Ray?
Yes?
Sorry to jump in. I missed a question on the last one. Mark May has asked the question, can you define the long latency time? How many years?
Oh, it varies.
It varies. There weren't hardly any of these that people talked about that we studied that came through to their fruition in less than 4 years. Is that what you mean in terms of the latency of how long did these innovations take?
Mark, do you want to answer that?
Yes, that's right. I guess even more specifically, once the innovator is well grounded in the organization, then is a successful innovator able to drive his idea from birth to application within a year, or are we talking 5 years?
No, you're talking often these breakthrough innovations where you're changing and reframing a problem. It's often it'll take 3 years to 4 years.
And a lot of it's going to depend on what you count as starting and ending the clock, because there's that whole immersive time frame to come up to speed and deeply understand the problem. It's once they maybe reframe it, for example, as we've talked about, will take some time. And then really navigating the organization can take considerable time. We didn't mention this earlier, but a number of the innovators, the successful innovators whom we interviewed, were at risk of losing their jobs at least one point in their career, and it was because they were advocating for things that ultimately were identified and realized in the marketplace as being good for the company, good for the shareholders, good for the customer. So there's that whole other challenge.
But challenge the current paradigm.
Yes. Yes.
And when you're challenging the current paradigm, there's a lot of times that's not easy to do, and it takes longer than you think it will. And so often they would talk about is that they'd have the idea, they'd work it, but it took a long time to get it through to A, accept it, and B, to actually realize it in product form. So, and then sometimes you had the first product wasn't a perfect one. I mean, even if you take the products that we hold up as iconic right now in terms of Apple's products, you look at the first iPod, and it was not a huge seller. It did not meet the expectations that the company had, and it was panned in the marketplace by many folks. And it wasn't until the second, third, maybe even fourth generation that it took off and became the product that we know and love. And so part of it is the ability to have the company stay with it. If you're putting GPS systems into Caterpillar equipment, which is one of the examples that we could talk about, I mean, it took a long time to figure out how to do that. It took a long time to get it into the equipment and then to work the databases and the systems and the other things so that you could run this huge equipment by wire and by satellite. That was a huge vision that took multiple years to realize, and they make progress at it a bit at a time, just like everybody else does.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Good. So if we just summarize the direct manager, and this is we just had a few slides on this topic, but a key takeaway is that this highly specialized treatment is not for everyone. We did a study where we identified that in a large organization you might have in your technical staff 1 in 100 to maybe as few as 1 in 500 people at this operating level. So everybody else is not expected and should not expect to get this kind of highly interpersonal treatment, and in many cases, if you will, in the best sense, breaking of the HR rules as appropriate. And it really only works because you've got these people with this incredible talent, the ability to collect and connect the dots as well as navigate the organization. And it also works because the managers are able to protect and provide for these people. And typically, in the time frame when we were able to hear these stories, there might have been at least an innovator-friendly or at least not an innovator rejection culture but they have been weakened over the years. And so this then permits us to look at the next question, and now we're going to move towards, from the manager's perspective, towards what the executive's perspective is at the highest level. And as Ray said at the outset of our webinar today, if you just hear the people who are recognized as serial innovators in organizations, they really have expressed concerns, and we don't take these concerns as just kind of the old guard complaining about change over time. They can point to some very specific things that Ray outlined earlier and really are contained in the slide. But basically, there's this move, if you will, toward what we'll refer to as kind of an optimization culture entirely at the expense of an innovator-friendly culture. And in a way, though, we can really understand this. If you look at the executive's perspective, and these are things that we've heard for quite some time in many organizations, that's the financial markets are driving this in many, many cases, but also some things that are perhaps more subtle than that. If you have an executive team that believes that the things that are most important are operational and measurable, that in a way kind of flies in the face of what we're talking about. Operations are like trying to keep a pendulum operating, very predictable, very deterministic, and innovation by its very character is not like that. So as you're moving towards this optimization culture, you're losing the time and attention to put on these other things. And then also there's this insight that we really think is important to know, that managers and executives in particular really only understand to a level in order to make a decision. And it's really impressive to see a senior executive grasp enough to be able to make a decision to go into a direction. But it's a very different set of skills than these innovators. And you'll find that many executives don't relate in the same way to the fact that the innovators understand in order to master and create and truly innovate. It's a much deeper form of understanding, but a very different skill set. So the interactions are a bit different, if you will.
Bruce, we had a question on the last slide.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, do the direct manager and serial innovator have a relationship that defines what each will do and have a way to express what they are, will, or have done, and around expectations, status, potentials, and such?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah.
They do over time. If they're successful over time, they do that, and it's a number of the things that we've talked about, that the manager puts a lot of the responsibility back on the innovator. So there's that. There's certainly that the innovator has to carry a fair amount of the ball. It's not that the manager is going to carry it all. So there's those kind of things. But they do work that out, and Bruce has made an analogy often that when it works, it's like a ballroom dance team, that you're both listening to the music, you're both working in the organizational culture, but you know what each other's going to do, and you're able to do it and perform exceedingly well, both doing your parts. And so I don't know that there's a formula for doing that, but there certainly is a relationship that develops, and it starts out of this relational versus transactional type of a management set of practices, and that you begin to understand each other, and you begin to see the value of the other person, and then the innovator sees the value of the manager as well. Where we see it break down is where that often you'll have a new manager come in that won't appreciate that or won't see that, and will want to do it in a more a transactional way, and that breaks down. We see innovators leave organizations because of those kinds of managerial changes in relationships, where they've had something that worked and that they've kind of figured each other out over time. And I think that's the other reason why they stay together. If it does work, they'd rather stay together because they're both more productive. The manager gets things to market and they grow the business better, and the innovator sees things that they're motivated to do to see the product come to fruition and see it in the hands of consumers as well.
Well, in like any kind of interaction like this, relational or otherwise, when anybody puts their needs or aspirations above that of the organization or the team or whatever, you're going to see things fall apart, and that's pretty typical here too. So you really see, as Ray said, the best results from this highly relational. They're both focused on trying to solve these problems. They're not putting their own career ahead of each other or ahead of the organization or customer.
And if you walk through the process that we talked about, so there's lots of subtleties and nuance here, but if you walk through the process that Bruce shared earlier, they give a lot more latitude in those early phases as the innovators are trying to find and understand the problem. There's a lot more space there. There may be a little bit more push as you move down that path and you begin to invent and validate and some other things, because there's a push to say, can we see things, and the manager wants to decide before maybe the innovator's created and understands enough to master and create. So you get those kind of tensions there, but as long as they're really valuing each other and seeing that, and that's why we've often said that great manager of innovators is fairly rare, because often you want results too fast. You want to bring things before they're done. You want to push the innovator ahead of schedule before they've actually understood what the problem is, and that creates. So there's a synthesis there, and what do you want to understand and expect from a manager?
Okay.
Great. Thanks. And thanks to Marty Cohen. I forgot to announce who asked the question.
Yes.
Thanks, Marty.
These have all been really great questions. Thanks to all. Yeah.
So now we're coming to say, so we've kind of, and again, this is a simple notion, but in most organizations today, there's a optimization culture, and that is that there's this culture of, say, I need to optimize what we currently have on the boards, and most of the managers, and we can talk about why. Bruce talked about some of the reasons why, but there's a whole bunch of things here, and you want it to be reliable, you want it to be structured, you want it to be relatively simplistic, versus this innovator culture that we see that we think will provide more revenue growth versus cost reduction, but it's surprise and uncertainty, there's volatility, there's simplicity on the other side of complexity, but often you get it's challenging. You can get lost in that complexity on the front end, and so we see these two cultures as being in tension there, and the challenge is, say, can you have that healthy tension? Most of the time, Christensen or others would say that no, that the optimization culture will win out over time and will drive out the innovator-friendly culture. We've seen the number of these innovators in companies, and they thrive where there is optimization, but there's also an innovator-friendly side of the culture, and those exist in a healthy tension rather than letting one drive the other out. But the natural tendency, it's easier, cleaner, and we think deadly, to not deal with the tension, and we see more and more companies that will drive that out. And it will get manifest in how do you make the investments and what else are you trying to do there. And so if we think about what do you do if you're an executive, and what do you do that? And we think the first set of tasks here has to do with, say, can we identify and develop the next generation of who are we recruiting, what do we look for, who do we invest in our aspiring innovators. We've said, and both of us have worked in industry, and I worked in management development for quite a bit in some pretty big companies, and you said we spend millions or more developing the talent, the managers, to optimize what the innovator makes possible, and we spend almost nothing in most of our organizations to say, how do you develop the next generation of innovators? So how do you develop them? What does that look like? And we did a little simple graphic of, say, okay, you've got some innovators, but we're losing the formula. The optimization culture is driving out. You've got a few old guards that have done it before, or you wouldn't be in business. You may have a one-hit wonder that did it once, or we've got a lot of talent in these young kids, but we don't have anybody to nurture them, or you've got a system that looks at this. And I think from a manager and executive point of view, and from an innovator point of view, you want to have a system that says we're recruiting the right kinds of kids coming out of school. We've got some people in the 5 to 10-year range that are doing that. You've got a set of proven innovators out here that says we can learn from and encourage with each other.
And then in addition to identifying and developing these people, are we really investing in innovation? And that really is financial as well as time. This next chart here shows that the earlier chart that we used at the outset showing where incremental versus breakthrough innovation might exist. And in some mature firms, you'll find it's so driven that there's really nothing in that breakthrough side. And so what we're suggesting is that even a slight change of rebalancing these numbers while reducing the amount of incremental investment or investment in incremental innovation could have a huge impact on being able to have some activity that's appropriately going on the breakthrough side. So we're suggesting that it's very likely that when you assess your portfolio that you're going to probably find it pretty heavily skewed towards this incremental, and really have to ask yourself, is it really breakthrough when we talk about it?
And then the last one there is that if you have these innovations, and we see companies that the greatest analogy is, are you willing to cannibalize your own products? Will you stay with breakthrough concepts long enough? Will they make it to market? We see some companies that will have these little groups and they'll do things, but they'll have innovations and they look interesting, but they never make it to market, and they don't stay with them long enough to really realize the results of the innovations.
And the risk too with those little groups as well is that they aren't connected to the marketplace very often. They're a bit too disconnected. So what does the executive need to do? They really need to really appreciate the value of this. They need to, if you will, kind of buy into the idea that this is important for the long-term viability of the firm, and then roll up their sleeves and get a bit more invested. It may not be that they have to get as fully invested as the managers, and probably not, but still they have to invest and understand that this is something that is different from optimization and begin to grasp what that means. And by doing so, betting on people, giving some latitude to allow these two cultures, innovator-friendly and optimization, to exist in tension, as Ray mentioned earlier.
And then as you lead that cultural transformation, I think we see innovators in companies doing that as well as executives, but it's can we identify and develop those innovators in your organization? Can we identify and develop managers with the skills necessary to unleash these innovators? Do we have permission to invest wisely? And it's getting harder and harder to hide money, to have these little skunk works or other things, but do you have permission to follow those innovators, and you do that? And do you monitor the performance metrics, but do it with deep personal insight, because it's not just about the metrics, it's about the feel for the business, it's about what might be a breakthrough, it's expecting that serendipity, it's expecting that those breakthroughs are going to happen, and then encouraging them as they do so.
So if we're to summarize this and kind of just take a 30,000-foot view of this, it's this deep personal insight into innovation that is very often lacking. You'll see countless writings and experts talk about a lot of different tools, which are all pretty valuable, but unless you really know how to grasp that tool and work with it, so that tool becomes part of you, it really can be potentially meaningless, especially if you use the wrong tool on the wrong place. And so we're strongly advocating this personal engagement. It's finding the right people, people who have these characteristics and traits and skills, the innovators, their managers, and their colleagues. We didn't have really any time to talk about the colleagues today, but they play a critical role in this. We don't want to be dismissive of others and say everybody else is in support of this. It's really the whole group working together to make this happen. And then finally, this tension between the optimization culture that in a way wants to drive out the innovator-friendly is almost kind of a virus, but yet the innovator-friendly that's just so necessary to allow the firm to survive.
And so we think we've understood something about these innovators and what they do, how they do it, how they work the organization. Now, part of our challenge is say, how do you identify and develop potential serial innovators? Can we do that Can we do that on campus before they graduate? So we've got some work that we're doing here with an innovation certificate where we think we can identify and provide some skills and some capabilities and some experiences. Can you do that sooner in companies before they fully emerge? Once they've invented a breakthrough and had it accepted in the organization, you realize that they're there, but what are the early characteristics and what do those look like, and how do you support them as they're in the nascent form? And that's part of that second bullet is can we identify this and create a robust, innovator-friendly culture in tension with and in congruence with the optimization culture. And if you've gone too far, can we strengthen the innovator-friendly culture that may have existed and it may be in risk of being lost? And can you transition from an optimization culture to one that's more innovator-friendly?
So we'd like to thank you for your time today. I know that we maybe only have about 7 or so minutes left, but we're more than happy to answer any questions now. And also, if any of you would like to contact us, going forward with some questions, depending on how Martha would like to arrange that, we're happy to engage in dialogue with you.
Great. Well, feel free, folks, to either type a question in or raise your hand. And I see we have one person raising their hand, and we'll take a question from Mark May.
Okay, thank you. So we're really fascinated with the idea that we could move from an optimization-driven culture to one that has more of a balance. Can you give us a couple of companies as a model that have done that, and how long did it take them?
Well, we could talk about how they've lost it, and I don't mean to be flip with that answer. We've seen a lot of companies losing this ability, and what we're saying is that it's a huge loss. I mean, it really it's something that that we're looking into as to how do you actually then bring it back now that optimization swung so far.
You see some. Let me give you.
Yeah, give an example. You could say. Not part of the research industry.
Part of not this research, but another colleague and I, Chuck House, wrote a book about Hewlett-Packard, and we talked about how they've been able to maintain that tension and to maintain an innovator-friendly culture for probably 6 decades. And then over the last 10 years, they've just struggled with that. Now we think Meg Whitman's trying to bring that back, and we'll see if she's successful. But boy, when you have almost as many auditors in an organization as you have people inventing and doing R&D work, it's really hard to have any flexibility that you need to go do these kind of innovations. So what we've been trying to do, and we see some companies are doing that. I think some of you may say that some of our colleagues at Procter & Gamble that we've obviously been in studied with, they'll say, gee, we were really innovator friendly several years ago, and we've kind of moved a little bit away from that to optimize a little bit more, and now you need to say, can we move back to be more innovator friendly? And that's a challenge. Some of our colleagues says you're never going to do that. Once you've lost it, you're done. And we'd like to think that said, okay, let's see what it would take, and that's our next research project.
Yes.
That's our next study to say, can you really revive that, and can you make that work? And frankly, we don't know the answer to that now, but we're looking for groups to study and to say, if you're trying to do that, we think we have some ideas for how to do that, and then we'd like to see if you can make it happen.
And not to be presumptuous, this may be something that would be a research on research activity with people at IRI, for example.
Yeah, good. We have another question from Marty, and sorry if I say your name wrong, Albeck, asking the question, the general feeling is that all people are inherently innovative, not that only special people are innovators. How do we train people towards innovation?
We work on that too. We've done a course here on creativity, say how do you get a habit of mind to do that? And we find that part of when we looked at this, there are some characteristics that people have that incline them this, and it's like anything else, you can get better at it as you work at it. and it depends on what your company wants and how much you're willing to invest in that. And we think that it's probably, while at one level would say everybody can get better, we would say let's pick those with some of the talent and some of the inclinations, and can we do a little bit more with them. So my wife teaches little kids violin, and I start out and I say, she says all of them are going to learn, and I watch them and I listen to them, and I go to we just had home concerts this week, and I say, yeah honey, but some of them learn a lot quicker than others. And so how do you make your bets? And there's other roles. In some of our work we talk about the roles of inventors, and we talk about the role of an implementer in an organization. And you think about the different roles that you need to make a successful R&D organization, and you need lots of different capabilities. And so you say, yes, I'd start with everybody. You can say everybody ought to be more inventive, more creative, more innovative. And there's some that are going to really excel and
be virtuosos, if you will. Yeah.
We have a number of questions coming in. We have only a few more minutes. There are some questions around characteristics, one about kind of encouraging innovation with tools, and another about are there characteristics also for people when looking at adjacent or sustaining innovation as opposed to just disruptive or breakthrough.
Okay, so we got
there, and there's
we haven't
looked at sustaining.
We haven't looked at the sustaining near as much to look at those in depth. We look at inventors versus an innovator, and we have done some preliminary work there that we're still working on a paper on. And the true inventors that will take a technology have many of the similar characteristics as an innovator, but not the passion for the customers. And so we think that passion for the customers helps take a technology or helps take an innovation and translate that into something that's actually going to be useful and will make it to market and be useful for customers.
Yeah, I can address the tools.
Go ahead.
You know, regarding the tools, what we want to do is make a bit of a distinction that of what we're talking about relative to a lot of tools. We don't think tools are bad. But the people that we've identified really discover the problem, they discover solutions to problem, they discover customer needs. The real activity is the discovery activity, and Ray's used a wonderful example. It's kind of like learning how to drive a car. First you figure out maybe where the pedals are, and then you gradually figure out how to turn the wheel. But when you're first driving, you're focused on that wheel and pedals, and eventually you kind of really aren't thinking about the wheels and pedals. And so in a way, and maybe I've not given enough time to really develop it, but in a way, innovation is people that are so immersed in understanding and discovery that they get to that point. They're so into it. The tools are good, but the risk that you run with many tools, the risk that you run, quite honestly, with many of the prescriptive observations in innovation books is that you apply them without understanding whether they really do address your need or not. And what we're talking about is people who deeply understand the needs. If you apply them by understanding the needs, it's wonderful. If you don't, you're just applying a tool. It's like using a nail on a screw.
And I know we're running out of time.
Sorry.
You've got our emails there. We'd be happy to do that. We'd be happy to talk to anybody else that would like to talk with us. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to other interactions with you.
Thanks again.
Well, we did have two questions we didn't get to. I don't know. We've lost a few people, but if you want to spend a couple moments on the last two questions.
We're happy to. We just didn't want to. We
thought you were going to cut us.
We thought you had it at hard ends. So we're fine.
Well, people are still here, and there's still questions. I say let's go for it.
We're fine.
We're delighted to. Go for it.
Okay, I have two questions. The first one is, are you studying crowdsourcing innovation at all?
I wouldn't say we're studying it deeply. We are certainly aware of it, and the crowdsourcing, in our view, is important. But you're more likely to get incremental things. You may get an idea, but you still have to have somebody inside that's going to go understand the problem, frame it properly, take that and apply it to a breakthrough. So you may get an idea or a spur outside, but you need these innovators who are going to take that and turn that into a product for you. So, and it still requires, there's that process that Bruce talked about, the finding, the deep understanding, and the synthesis of all of those parts. So the crowdsourcing gives us lots of dots. You still need somebody that's going to synthesize and connect those dots.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, I think, to whomever asked that question and anybody else who's interested in it, I kind of encourage you to ask the question, where and when does crowdsourcing make the most sense? And perhaps you're asking us that. Like Ray said, we haven't studied it, but we'd encourage you to dig into that. It's not unlike open innovation as a concept, or Christensen's disruptive innovation. Again, good concepts, do they apply everywhere? Not really. And so you have to ask, when's the right time to use these things? And again, not to belabor it, we're really talking about that insight that comes from immersing yourselves.
And one last question, and this may be just you either know or you don't, or you might have an example. For Mark May, do you have knowledge of any optimization-driven company who has created a separate business unit with a new innovator-friendly culture?
Well, it's kind of the Christian.
Yeah,
it's kind of the Christensen model, I'd say.
I mean, I think if you look at a Oracle,
Yeah.
they would go acquire the innovation and then say, can you make that work inside your company? There are certainly a number of people that have created the Skunk Works. There's a number of organizations that have done that. And then the challenge is always to say, how do you transition those in? So our view would be to take those separately, then you have a technology transfer problem to bring it back into the main organization, and you still have, if you create a little group that goes outside and goes out, do they make it successful, and will they ever get the kind of resources that you need? I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a very personal story on this. I was part of a business unit in Motorola that was sold by Motorola to a smaller company, and we were acquired, very openly stated by the other company, to bring in innovation to that company. And what had happened in that very specific situation is that in a relatively short period of time, a large number of engineers and technical staff left the organization. Some did stay and continued to contribute, but those acquisitions, when an optimization culture is acquiring an innovator-friendly culture or even a strongly innovative culture, you find that it's hard to make that mesh. And so what we're talking about is very different. We're talking about individuals, small numbers of them, that really appropriately work through the organization. And, without belaboring it, we have countless examples in a large number of companies and a large number of industries where this works. And so this is not meant to be only prescriptive. It's descriptive of what can work and what does work, if that helps.
Great. Well, thank you to you both. This has been a great session. I'm glad we had lots of questions, and thanks to everybody for sticking on. Yes, these slides are already available on the annual meeting summary website, and we will be downloading a kind of a redo of this recorded presentation that will be available to everybody as well. So thank you very much to Bruce and Ray for being with us again today and sharing your knowledge and your information for our folks. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank
we
you.
enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. And also the slides are available on the brown bag page of the IRI website if you're having trouble finding the other ones, or I can just send them to you if you need me to. Wonderful. Well, with that, I think we will end the session for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for being with us today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.